Elizabeth Cady Stanton, born Elizabeth Cady on November 12, 1815, grew up in Johnstown, New York. Stanton was raised by her parents and was the second oldest of her siblings, many of whom died in infancy. As a child, Stanton strove to be highly educated in order to impress her father, Judge Daniel Cady, who repeatedly said he wished she had been a boy. Stanton received her formal education from Johnstown Academy and from her personal tutor, Dr. Hosack. From Johnstown Academy, Stanton wished to attend Union College with her male peers, but women were not allowed there. So instead, Stanton attended Emma Willard's Troy Female Seminary in New York. While Stanton was at Troy Female Seminary, she was the leader of the Presbyterian Girls Club. One of their missions was to raise money to educate a young man for the seminary. The girls worked hard to raise money to pay the way of a student at Auburn Theological Seminary. They invited him to preach a sermon in their church, but what he had to say caused the girls, especially Stanton, to question their roles as women in society. His opening words were, "But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence." 1 Timothy 2:12. With this, the girls, led by Stanton, left the church without hearing another word. This incident was the first major event that led Stanton in the direction of revolution. Elizabeth Cady Stanton often visited her cousin, Gerrit Smith, at his home in Peterborough, New York. During one of her visits, she met abolitionist Henry Brewster Stanton. The two activists realized their common interests in anti-slavery sentiment and fell in love. They got married on May 1, 1840, and honeymooned to an anti-slavery conference in London, England. During the conference, Stanton met Lucretia Mott, an abolitionist and feminist. The two became known to each other after they were both denied access to the convention due to their gender. 8 years after the convention, Mott and Stanton met in Waterloo and developed the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, which was a document that stated the grievances of women and their demand for women's suffrage. The two women called for a convention in Seneca Falls, New York, that began on July 19th and ended on July 20th of 1848. This is where the Declaration of Sentiments was revised and signed by about 300 women and men. Some signers were very famous, including the abolitionist Frederick Douglass.
Susan B. Anthony was born February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts. She grew up in a tight-knit Quaker family where women were able to speak and preach freely. Growing up in this environment, Anthony did not realize that women did not have these privileges everywhere. Anthony was the second of 8 children to her father, Daniel Anthony, who ran a cotton mill, and her mother, Lucy Reed Anthony, who were both very supportive in Anthony's involvement in reforms as she was growing up. In 1826, Susan B. Anthony and her family moved to Battenville, New York, but she was soon sent to Deborah Molson's Female Seminary in Philadelphia, where she began studying. 11 years later, Anthony returned to Battenville, where she began teaching to help her family make money after they had become bankrupt. In 1845, Anthony and her family moved again to a farm in Rochester, New York. 1 year later, she began her first paying job as the head of the girls' division at Canajoharie Academy, where she spent 2 years teaching. In 1848, Anthony joined the Daughters of Temperance and later became involved with the abolitionist movement. Her family's home in Rochester, New York, was the meeting place for many abolitionists, such as Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. This is the likely cause for Anthony's strong desire to help in the abolitionist movement. In the spring of 1851, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony first met at an anti-slavery convention in Syracuse, New York, held by William Lloyd Garrison and George Thompson. When they first met here, they instantly became friends, and so began a lifelong friendship that would change countless people's lives and the world of women for their time and for all generations after them. After she met Stanton, Anthony attended a Sons of Temperance convention in Albany, New York, where she planned on speaking. However, she was not allowed to speak, and she was told that her and the other women attending had been invited only to listen and learn. This is when she realized that women would not be taken seriously in society until they had the right to vote. Later that same year, Anthony and Stanton founded the Women's State Temperance Society, which eventually petitioned for the New York State legislature to pass a law that limited the sale of liquor. However, the petition was rejected since most of the 28,000 signatures were from women and children.
During the Civil War, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton established the first national women's political association called the Women's Loyal National League. Many of the members were women suffragists who had halted their work at home to help with the war effort.
1 year later, Anthony and Stanton also helped with the formation of the American Equal Rights Association, which strove to provide suffrage for African American men and all women. Although their plan was to obtain suffrage through the 14th and 15th Amendments, even abolitionists didn't support their plight. Feeling discouraged, Stanton and Anthony organized the National Women's Suffrage Association, which was a group of women that attempted to obtain a federal women's suffrage amendment. During this time, women were not allowed to vote, but on November 5, 1872, Susan B. Anthony cast her vote in the presidential election for Ulysses S. Grant.
During this time, Elizabeth Cady Stanton began focusing more on traveling and writing to benefit the women's suffrage movement, rather than actively participating in protests and suffragette events. In 1902, at the age of 86, Elizabeth Cady Stanton died due to heart failure.
After the death of Stanton, Susan B. Anthony met with President Theodore Roosevelt in hopes of submitting a suffrage amendment to Congress. 1 year later, Anthony died at the age of 86 due to heart failure and pneumonia.
Although Stanton and Anthony, as well as many other suffragettes, did not live to see it, the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. The amendment gave all women over the age of 21 the right to vote.
Anybody who sets the stage for somebody else to come and do something equivalent or better, we have to tip our hats to them and say, well, thank you for doing that.
Yes, I do. I believe that had they not made the efforts and the accomplishments that they had done, I would never have even had the opportunity to run for a council seat.
Efforts that were done prior to me becoming mayor, regardless of when it was done, has benefited every woman.
I feel like I am serving on city council and being able to represent my city in that way is continuing the efforts that they've put forth.
Sure, I think it absolutely is. Like I said, like in my position as an elementary principal, I don't feel like I have to fight as hard. But if I were just dead set on my goal as being a secondary administrator, I can absolutely tell you I would feel it.
Yes, I do. I still feel like there's area that men feel like they dominate and that the women definitely need to move into those areas and careers.
Of course it is. Because oftentimes we're not given the same degree of respect as men. We don't get the same pay as men in a lot of instances.
Yeah, the fight's not over.